developing advocacy and implementation. Here are our career skills, and today we're going to be mainly looking at engagement across perspectives. And here are our lovely panelists.
Perfect. All right, Caroline, I will introduce our panelists and kick us off. So hi, everyone. I'm Sydney. Caroline, did you want to give any more information about universal design? Did you want to share anything else before we jump into the panelists?
Oh, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. So welcome everyone to our panel on universal design and accessibility in the workplace. I'm Caroline Rogers, one of the coordinators for disability outreach here at the Career Center. And we are thrilled to have you with us as we celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Today's panel will explore how universal design principles can be applied to create a more inclusive workplace. And it is an honor to have such a diverse group of experts with us today. To guide our conversation, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Sydney Gallup. Sydney is the head of marketing at the Career Center and one of the career coaches for the arts, media, and design career communities. She will lead us through our discussion. And I'll hand it over to Sydney. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. All right, so thanks for having me here to moderate today. I'm very excited to hold this discussion and have our panelists here. So I'm going to briefly introduce everyone and then we will jump into it. Any of our panelists here today, if I don't mention something that you think is relevant, feel free to use some time later today to talk more in depth about your background, of course. But we have here with us today Laura Holt. Laura is a professional development coach and facilitator with a rich and diverse background in tech recruiting, coding bootcamp coaching, and nonprofit leadership. Over the past decade, Laura has built a career focused on engagement, relationship building, and social media management across various sectors. She holds an MS in global education and is trained in corporate sponsorship leadership coaching. Laura has helped over 150 professionals advance their careers and develop key leadership skills. We also have Dr. Rosemarie Rossetti, who is here. She is an internationally known expert on accessible and universal design. Dr. Rossetti consults with developers, architects, designers, builders, realtors, property owners, focusing on the built environment from homes to cities. She and her husband, Mark Leader, led the design and construction of the Universal Design Living Laboratory, a national demonstration home in Columbus, Ohio, which is North America's highest rated universal design home. Dr. Rossetti is also the author of the Universal Design Toolkit, a valuable resource for making homes accessible. Her work has been featured in over 100 articles, including Architectural Digest and the Wall Street Journal. We also have here with us Jerlyn O'Donnell. Jerlyn is a seasoned graphic designer with over 20 years of experience in the digital health sector. Jerlyn has worked with global leaders in healthcare advertising, leading teams of product designers and UX architects. She's also the founder of Design Lady LLC, a graphic design company dedicated to amplifying diverse voices and promoting accessibility. With a proven track record of delivering cutting-edge user interface designs, Jerlyn leverages emerging technologies and emphasizes equitable and inclusive design principles. Then we have Katherine McCord. Katherine is the founder and president of Titan Management, a people operations consulting firm, and the inventor of the first ever anti-bias applicant tracking system. She's also a published author and the founder of the Neuroverse, a nonprofit organization dedicated to neurodiversity. Katherine is passionate about advancing her three core missions: integrity, inclusion, and innovation. She's spoken at prestigious events and organizations, including AIMS, the United Nations, the London School of Business, SHRM, Web Summit, and more. And then lastly, we have Tracy Vollbrecht. Tracy is a recognized adaptive and universal design consultant whose work has been featured in WWD, Vogue, Oprah Daily, and Cosmopolitan. With a wealth of experience advising and educating startups, corporate brands, universities, and organizations, Tracy is a leader in the field. Her journey into universal design began when she unknowingly applied its principles to help her father manage his multiple sclerosis. Today, she develops tailored strategies to help clients achieve their diversity, equity, equity and inclusion goals. We're thrilled to have everyone here today with us, and I'm very excited to hear from this panel of experts. So we're going to jump into the first question. All right, so we want to get started on the core principles of universal design. So what are they and how can they be applied to workplace environments to benefit all individuals, including those, of course, with disabilities? Whoever wants to get started can take it away.
I think I can start that one. There are many principles of universal design, and we're going to be talking about some of those in terms of equitable use. And that one deals with a lot of things that we're dealing with in terms of a person with a disability, how we modify the environment or the products that they use so that they do have equitable and fair use of the products or the environment or the learning experience. Flexibility in use is a second principle of universal design. Simple and intuitive use in terms of being able to see the controls and understand how the product works. Looking at your technology, some of them are very easy. You've got smartphones right now. Some of them are really easy and some of them are difficult. The other is the perceptible information in terms of looking at how things are labeled, tolerance for error so that we don't hurt ourselves as we're using the products, and low physical effort so that we can utilize the engineering of the product so that we don't have to use our own muscles and force. And then size and space and approach for use. I'm here in my wheelchair, and so I need a 5-foot turning radius if I'm going somewhere. And so those are the basic 7 principles of universal design to get us started.
That was perfect, Rosemarie. You nailed that. Like that was just like the best short explanation. And I love I love hearing people talk about universal design. I started learning about it years ago because I've been in IT recruiting, kind of like Laura. I've been around the tech recruiting world for a long, long time, right? And so I've been around this principle for a while. But what struck me as interesting is that we never really talked about it in terms of HR as a society and in a large scale, right? We don't talk about it in terms of the design of how we work. Now we'll talk about it in terms of the design of the workplace, right? But not in terms of how we work. And so from processes to procedures to technology to the design of the physical space to how we interact and communicate with one another, universal design is part of all of that and needs to be incorporated. And what's really cool to me is that it ends up benefiting not only the disability community, but everyone as well, which I found to be astronomically powerful in the workplace.
I think one way I also started to understand the concept of like universal design translating to different arenas was it doesn't exactly matter what you're designing. You could be designing anything, but each design, so whether that is like a house or a physical environment, or for example, in tech recruitment, it was like inclusive interview design, how like the process of an interview could go and how the information would come out. All of that is more of a holistic design approach, and I call it like a proactive approach. You're not waiting for accommodation requests to come in. You are almost proactively, I like to call it potentially avoiding the need for specific requests because you've already comprehensively tried to cover a lot of requests that take very little time to include from the get-go in the design of a process, procedure, curriculum. And so I think that's how I started to think about how universal design concepts that I think came from the educational space, perhaps first, and the accessibility physical design space could be applied to like workplaces as well and different procedures.
Yeah.
And I love how you cross it over to tech because on devices, so I focus in that space. So some things we don't usually talk about is also learning abilities. So I work in healthcare. We have a lot of drugs that people can't pronounce. So along with making sure it's all our designs are adaptable to every single size. We think about how this is communicated to the individual user as well. So I love to say that we're designing for people we know and we don't know yet. And universal design actually principles actually helps us make sure that it's accessible to all.
When I'm educating people in the fashion industry, so that's my specialization there. I usually say it in the like kind of simplest terms of design with consideration of everyone, not just people with disabilities, but definitely people with disabilities, but really thinking through everyone. And for me, in the design process of that, so again, mostly, you know, apparel, garments, shoes, accessories, kind of everything within that fashion space or what we put on our body. The biggest consideration is always the variety of lived experience, and that one person testing it or wearing it or saying this works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. And so getting a variety of lived experiences to test the product, to give feedback on the product or the process, doesn't just have to be a product, so that it can really actually truly work for as many people as possible, that universal aspect.
Yeah.
And could you all share some examples of successful universal design implementations, whether it's in office spaces, educational institutions, and then share a little bit more about those specific examples improving accessibility, what that really looks like?
One of the first big initiatives that I've started utilizing with my clients is what I call making accommodations standard options. Like we turn them into, we're not going to make them accommodate. This is just what we have, right? This is just the thing. And in fact, if you send me an email or book an appointment, you will see a link to the list of standard accommodations. And then there's a fill in the blank of tell me what else you got. Because I can't think of everything, right? Like I've done the polls and the surveys and all this, but I'm not going to think of everything. And my list is, of course, specific more to kind of what people might need working with me. But it's teaching these companies how to implement this, how to think in terms of just letting people work in ways that are natural to their bodies, right, and to their minds. And because I do a lot of work, it's to Jerlyn's point, it's the neurodiversity and all of that as well, and I do a lot of work around that. And teaching people to communicate appropriately, how to offer different communication styles, how to work with different types of procedures, and how to do all these things seamlessly and flowing. So making accommodation standard options or AKA building in flexibility is kind of another way to look at it. And this has been really wonderful. So with my clients, we see an average uptick of productivity of about 25% up to over 30% in productivity. We see massive increases in retention, employee wellness, and as well as innovation, because when people are allowed to climb up Maslow's hierarchy of wellness, right, then they move into a place where they can be more creative and innovative. And then we can, move into a more kind of fun area of work, right? So it's been a really exciting way to view accessibility in the workplace. So that's my number one initiative, is turning accommodations into standard options.
Go ahead, Rosemarie.
Well, I need to tell you about my home. I'm speaking to you from the National Demonstration Home and Garden in Columbus, the Universal Design Living Laboratory. So it is a very successful model utilizing accessibility and universal design. As I'm seated here, I'm 4'2". My husband is 6'4". So you can imagine that this house has been designed not just for me, a wheelchair user, but also my husband. And so if you are curious about our home, I invite you to a virtual tour at our website, which is udll.com, just the initials udll.com. You can play a game. Our cat was the photo bomber during the shoot, and you'll see our little cat Kiko, a little orange cat, throughout the virtual tour. But some of the features in our home are looking at the kitchen. We have different heights of counters on the center island. I like a 30-inch height. My husband likes the 40-inch height. We also have a 35-inch height. Around the perimeter, we have a 34-inch height. So it accommodates everybody. Anyone who's been here on a tour says this kitchen is ideal for everyone. We don't have to climb up on the counters to reach things. 50% of the storage is reachable from a seated position. So there's a lot of features specifically for me in the wheelchair. Of course, one is the knee space, to be able to roll under the sink, to be able to roll under the 30-inch countertop, to be able to roll under the cooktop. So there's a lot of features in our home that everybody appreciates. It's not just me. When I showcase my oven, it has a hinge door with the hinge on the side, rather than most of your ovens have the hinge on the bottom. Well, that gives you much more access to putting food in and out of the oven if the door is swung over to the side instead of on the bottom, creating an obstacle. So those are some things that I think have been very successful.
And Laura, you wanted to share?
Sure. I guess two of the examples that stand out the most, one was a retroactive universal design option, but I was at a coding boot camp as a career coach, and some of the former coaches had designed some of the career curriculum, and those were given out in virtual workshops, very similar to if you were doing, online schooling. And a lot of them, didn't have as much experience with either neurodivergence or disability. And so you could call them, PowerPoint presentations maybe oriented towards a normative audience. And I got word that I was about to have a cohort of students from a vocational rehabilitation program that were 75% of the cohort was disabled in some way. And that was both neurodivergence as well as physical disabilities, as well as visual disabilities. And so knowing that, I asked and permission to redesign the career curriculum, which luckily was already going through a renovation. So I think that helped get it approved a little bit. And I worked alongside an instructional designer, but they didn't have a specialty in accessibility. And so I was able to, because I both have ADHD and know what I would prefer, and was able to do research on how other neurodivergent disabilities or disorders might either correlate or be opposing. That is sometimes something we have to consider. I was able to figure out what the best overall changes might be to the curriculum. And, some of those things were especially making sure a screen reader could access either the PowerPoints, or we were about to load them to a learning management system, kind of like Canvas or Blackboard. And so some of the PowerPoints were putting in things like screenshots, and a screen reader can't read through screenshots. It can read through text. So I went through and replaced all the screenshots of whatever it was trying, to explain, so that would help and it wouldn't detract from any of what was, originally in the presentation. So I went through the curriculum with this eye for, if I could accommodate one or especially more than one disability, I kind of screened for, okay, would this accommodate someone with dyslexia? A lot of the PowerPoints also had chunks of paragraphs. And I liked to say, no one actually likes paragraphs, even people without disabilities, but especially that would help both people with dyslexia, people with ADHD who don't have the time or energy to read through a whole paragraph, perhaps people with autism, depending, but, having more straightforward bullet points. So my goal was to banish the paragraph in that project. And things like that really helped across the board for both screen readers as well as multiple disabilities that we might get through the cohort. And that also avoided that when the accommodations came in, which usually is the first week of class, we didn't actually have to go back and change very much at that point. And that would have been a formal accommodation request that, otherwise we would have had to spend a lot of kind of what was supposed to be class time or, training time fixing the curriculum. So we were able to prevent that problem and get ahead of the game, actually. So we didn't actually end up having to revise the curriculum more than that once class started, which was really nice. The other way is simply through inclusive interview design practices. And I'll put a link if I can find one that kind of summarizes that. But I think one of the best ways that's shown with interviews is, for example, there's a new trend that still not all companies do, but a more inclusive way to prepare people for interviews, which accommodates anxiety, autism, ADHD, is sending a list of interview questions ahead of the interview. And that's not only going to help people with disabilities, but it's also going to help anyone else who perhaps is just nervous about what they're going to be asked in an interview. So again, it's helping either all or more than one group of people, and is not waiting for an accommodation of, can I have the interview questions, right? It is providing them without having to be asked, and kind of standardizing that as well, kind of like Katherine was saying. So that's another way I've used it in my past workplaces. And I had to be the one to kind of volunteer to do that in projects. I don't think the higher ups at my company would realize maybe that would be a problem for someone. And me coming in neurodivergent to the workplace, I could kind of understand why that would benefit more than just people like me with ADHD, but across the board would help a lot of different people.
And to piggyback off of that, Laura, so with my inclusive interviewing as well, another thing that I teach and practice every time is begin the interview by answering their questions and decompressing their stress.
Yes.
And when you start off that way, it completely changes the entire pace of the interview, and you have a much calmer person, a person who's in a headspace, and again, moving them back up the Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like getting them back to that more cerebral thinking, and not that, oh my God, I've got to remember to ask this question, or I'm stressed about the pay, or I'm stressed about the benefits. Taking all that and up front and answering their questions, and then moving in, also preparing more than one way to ask questions, having visual aids for more complex issues, all that kind of thing, all plays in as well. But yeah, I just love that, Laura. So thank you.
Yeah, I like the screen readers too, because I'm someone who doesn't like a lot of text on slides. So we practice scannable text, so very short chunks. But actually, what I implemented at a past place was closed captions on video. You do see a lot of closed captions on videos now, generally where you're probably consumer, but in healthcare, it's crazy how little I see. However, adding closed caption does additional benefits that people don't think about. For example, other languages. So your video can translate into other languages. So people who don't speak your native language can also benefit from that content. And because I work in this field where metrics are important, we can see these people from these locations. So now we know we can prepare documents for that specific group of people coming from different countries. It was actually quite shocking. I worked on the Pfizer COVID website, and we had to translate multiple languages. And yes, we have things that are localized, but we are able to track in real time which content they're specifically interested in. So that helps benefit a majority of people.
Jerlyn, I'm glad you mentioned the closed captionings. That was the example that I was going to touch on as well. And I think that one is kind of, in today's day and age, just the easiest example, because at least for the younger generations, they're watching their TikToks, they're watching their Instagram reels, all with captions on. No one's got their sound on unless they're at home. So also having that, in their social media, in their courses that they're taking online or in person, just to help people learn in different ways, people understand something in different ways. And that was something that was started as a disability accommodation, and now I would say is pretty universal, right? It's pretty,
Sure.
and I think that's kind of also one way to look at universal design, is thinking through the other way of like, okay, this started as a disability accommodation or an accessibility improvement, and now look at all the people that it's benefiting in all of these different ways that we might not have even thought of.
Yeah, I actually have a personal story because I have a toddler. Like I said, I had her during lockdown. So to keep, I try to keep the noise level very low. So I actually own a Peloton, and I was taking these lessons in a different language and didn't realize it was not in English until 4 classes in. When I finally put it on, I was like, wait, I didn't know what language this was. However, I was able to continue to class because it didn't have that barrier. So I love when I come across devices like that. So it was helping me, a new mom, trying to make sure my toddler sleeps, and also people who have hearing impairments as well. So it helps solve it for a majority of people.
Okay, so I've heard a couple of you now bringing up the idea that yes, it's made for these very particular reasons, these particular groups of people, but of course it helps everybody. So how are you all addressing the common misconception that universal design only benefits individuals with disabilities rather than enhancing the experience for everyone?
I can jump into that one. So within the fashion space, the most common way that I address it is actually by showing examples. Unfortunately, I don't have anything with me, but I have a few products that I have designed that are universally designed that I usually don't even say, hey, this is for someone with disabilities. I just say, hey, this is this product I designed, a jacket. The jacket has a magnetic zipper at the bottom. And then I show someone how to do it. And they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I would love that. That would make getting dressed so easier. And then they usually chime in with some type of personal experience. A lot of common ones are like, that would work so well for my toddler who's just learning how to zipper. Oh, that would work so well for my great aunt who has arthritis. Oh, that would work so well when I'm wearing gloves and trying to zip my jacket. And then it's kind of people are thinking through the universal design on their own by just being shown an example of universal design. And I would imagine, Rosemarie, you probably get a ton of that in your house.
Oh, yes, they all say, I want that. You know, things that are out of reach in your cabinet that you'd wish that shelf would pull down. It's like, yeah, there are adaptions for shelves that are do it yourself, and that shelf will then lower to be able to get the contents off of that shelf. There's so many things in our home that people go, I wish I had that. I wish I had those conveniences. Must have, you know, a washer and dryer. I was on a tour last week with some people, and my washer and dryer on raised pedestals, making it so that when I open the front loaded washer and dryer, it's at a very convenient height for me and my husband, Mark, rather than having it about, a foot and a half or 2 feet lower where I have to go down to get the clothes in and out of the washer and dryer. And they're like, wow, that was such a simple thing to buy the drawers that came with the washer and dryer to raise them on a raised pedestal. And it's like, yeah. And then, you know, little simple things like that make an impression on people going, wow, I could build that myself. I could just have a carpenter come in and put my washer and dryer up a couple feet, and that would make it so much more easy for me to get things out of the washer and dryer. So all kinds of things that are so simple, they're on the market now. And so as we look at our smartphones, as we look at our watches, there are so many accessibility settings that we don't even realize were there because of people with disabilities. The voice to text, the commands that are made, the push buttons for your blinds, and going back into your garage door opener. Why was that made automatic? Because people with disabilities couldn't open their garage door. And now the technology is you use your smartphone. If you've got a house in Florida and you live in Columbus, you can still open your garage door for somebody that needs in your garage from your phone. I mean, the technology lots of times originated for a need for a population with disabilities, and some special people came together, engineers, that said, I think we can do that. And now it's just part of everyday life.
I think that's so true, Rosemarie. And I think that, you know, a lot of times the people I'm having to convince are business owners, right? Or business executives. And the number one thing I get pushed back on is, well, this is how we've always done it. And I say, well, you know, if that's your best reason, you're not doing it right, I promise. You know, that's not it. You know, we kind of have a laugh and we just kind of talk through it. And they're like, well, you know, it's such a small percentage of the population. And I go, well, hold on a minute. So, and I start breaking down how much of the population is neurodiverse, how much of the population is physically diverse, how much of the population can move in and out of that based on certain things going on in their lives. Somebody posted earlier in the comments that this is the only, marginalized community that you can easily go in or out of, at multiple times of your life, right? And so I start talking about that, and they start to realize that it's over half the population either is or will be in this demographic at some point. And then talking to them about things like, we always talk about the sidewalk example, the little slopes on the sidewalk and how that helps everybody. I've used the garage door example. Rosemarie, I think you're the only other person I've ever heard use that one. And I've got a few others from you, so thank you, that I'm going to totally steal. But just kind of helping them to see, and even in terms of the interviewing, just saying, well, everybody gets nervous before an interview, so doesn't it make sense to do it this way? And then I use a lot of learning and communication references. Instead of talking about disability, I'll just talk about learning differences and communication variances, because that's universal to everyone, and it actually does apply to everyone. And so making sure that as practitioners that we're using inclusive language to include everyone and not to only discuss one group, I think is really important in universal design as well.
I think another way I've used, kind of statistics to get across to a lot of people kind of in the corporate world or in kind of the educational world where you might be building out curriculum, anywhere where, disabilities are probably coming up, but maybe not noticed as much. Especially I work a lot in a remote environment, so you're literally not physically seeing a lot of disabilities going on unless you're asking. But there's a statistic, I think it was Harvard Business Review did a study, and in the corporate workplace, there's still not a lot of psychological safety. There's still a lot of nervousness about disclosing a disability. And so they actually found out that I think 70 to 75% of employees don't disclose a disability at work. So you might, like Katherine said, think it's a small percentage of the population because that's the only percent that was willing to disclose because they don't feel safe enough. So you could be, kind of designing for a lot larger amount of employees than you realize. And I think there's also, especially with neurodivergence, the data out there that, you can have a disability, but not be either diagnosed officially, which means you couldn't request an official accommodation, or not know, and there's a lot of late diagnoses happening. And so again, that is where you can join the community, but still have maybe the performance issues or learning style issues come across, and then until you have an official diagnosis, which you have to get through a psychiatrist or doctor, and our healthcare system, right? There's lots of ways people might not even have a diagnosis, especially perhaps when it comes to something that's not a physical disability. I think you're going to realize, how many more employees you might be helping out and to help perform better. I think the way to get across is what's the goal here. And the goal is, usually like high performance in the learning environment. It is learning and actually learning the material. And so then if you can relate it back to how can we best help people like perform to their best ability or learn to their best ability, then the, universal design ends up achieving the goals of either, the corporate workplace or a learning institution. And so it's easier to show them, right? If our goal is to achieve this, here's how you can do that the best, because you might not know who you're trying to accommodate. So, go broader than that, be more proactive than that.
Laura, you're saying all the gems. So I like to remind clients that I'm playing the long game, because, and I did drop a quote that I found online. The disabled community is considered the only minority group that anyone can join at any point in your life, whether through birth, accident, illness, or aging process. Since I work in the digital space, I really don't know who's looking at our content. And I encourage our clients to try to meet as many people, because they are going to be our best influencers. Because the first thing that people do when something's very intuitive to use is they talk about it, they share it with their friends. And we have loyalty without even trying. I can market to you as much as I want to get you to buy my product, but if it's not beneficial to you, you're going to ignore it. You might actually say terrible things about it if it's not accessible. So, so I prefer to make sure that we are doing the right thing by spending our dollars correctly. And I can always bring back to money. It's like, look, we don't have to spend as much on marketing, like I mentioned, if someone trusts us. And it's beneficial for everyone. And yes, I am playing the long game because while I'm trying to have empathy and everything, I will never know what it is to be that person who's disabled, because actually I'm more of an ally than a disabled person. I'm not, like, I just work in a space. So I always try to make sure that I'm meeting that individual where they are, but I don't know them usually. They're the best hackers. They won't tell you, like Laura mentioned, they won't disclose that most times. So again, we never know, and I'm getting older, so I'm also preparing for that.
All right. Well, I'm curious to know a little bit more about if any of you have experienced challenges when you've been implementing universal design solutions, and then how you've been able to overcome those challenges.
Oh yeah, like I mentioned, I always bring it back to money to the clients. I love showing those examples of lawsuits. That's the easiest way to, that's the easiest way. I was like, this is law and we're gonna make this happen. So we don't often talk about it in healthcare space, but it's happening now. And there are people who actually make money just looking at things that are not accessible and start these lawsuits. So happy about that. So I can show those examples to my client, and the pushback on my team, they actually, because I work in the design industry, they always assume that making things accessible means it won't be beautiful. And I've been able to show them more often than not that you can make beautiful, intuitive design that are accessible. And it's getting easier for me to show that because there's more people working in that space. Yay. But the pushback, I get less now because I can show metrics, numbers, dollars.
Yeah, in the fashion industry, we also have those same pushbacks. The biggest one around the like fashionable or stylish part, going hand in hand with the functionality. And at least in kind of the early days of adaptive fashion, which is kind of late 90s, early 2000s, there really just weren't many fashionable, accessible clothing companies. The products that were out there that were for people with disabilities, or that were more universally designed, just weren't things people wanted to wear. So we didn't have that ability to kind of point to that and say like, oh, look at that. Luckily that is changing, but definitely the big pushback for a lot of the brands and clients and potential clients that I work with is really the cost, and the time, energy, and investment that goes into it, especially in an industry that's also kind of at the same time facing the challenge of fast fashion and how quickly and cheaply something can be done. So that's really kind of the two biggest pushbacks within the fashion industry specifically.
I've gotten a lot of cost pushbacks as well, even on the professional side. But one of my favorite things to immediately, throw back at them is, well, according to the Department of Labor, 54% of accommodations are free. So I think we're okay budget wise, and they just kind of laugh, and I'm like, so I think free is within budget. Another one is that, and this sounds bizarre, but it has come up more than once of people saying, well, we're not being inclusive of able-bodied people if we're focused on helping people with disabilities. And I'm like, no. And I do like to tell people, I believe inclusion is for literally everyone. There's not a single person that inclusion does not encompass. And so then I go into the talking about, we were talking about earlier, how things benefit both. The other is, well, I would know if my employees had a disability. And I look at them and I say, how many do you think I have? And they go, oh, maybe one. And because most people know about my seizures. They know about that. I say, try 8. Can you count them? And they just look at me and they're like, 8? I said, yes. I said, I'm a human octopus in more than one way. So it's, we call it, at least say that for the neurodivergent community. I also have 8 disabilities. That's my 8 little arms. And it's very true. You cannot always spot these things. And to Laura's point, people are not always going to disclose. They're not going to talk about it. They're going to mask it. Even physical disabilities. My mother has rheumatoid arthritis, and she now uses a mixture of cane and walker, mostly walker at this point. Her hands are folding in, but at first she tried to cover it up, right, at work, because she didn't want people to, to discriminate against her. And so people will try to cover all kinds of disabilities. You never know what's really going on. And so creating, again, back to that psychological safety and all that, and just teaching people a little, it's really about education. I love to have classes. So I typically start with any organization I work with, holding a class to understand about different types of disabilities and how this doesn't mean that they're less than, that they're impaired, that they're not capable. And we go through that education together and with a curiosity-based approach. I actually teach people how to turn off their ego mechanisms and respond in curiosity. And then from that standpoint, we can move forward in much more productive fashion.
I also think with the cost and time and energies, something I've heard is simply like, either, we don't have anyone who could deal with this, as in we don't have someone who's like qualified to maybe redo curriculum, or an accessible web designer or something like that, at their company. So they think of it as, I guess, it would take too much time to go fix something because they don't have a staff member who's engaged in that work. And it makes me kind of wonder, like, what qualifications and what interview process people are having for things like instructional designers, curriculum designers, really a lot of different people, recruiters. There's lots of different positions where you could proactively be including knowledge of accessibility techniques or knowledge of universal design in job descriptions, so that you do have someone who's both, qualified, aware, and wants to do that work. And I think there are a lot of professionals out there who do know this work, but companies aren't quite prioritizing maybe that in their hiring standards, because maybe they're not realizing that, it would relate to someone's job position. So I think that's been an obstacle. My way around that was always volunteering to take that on. And as a professional, I could connect the dots to why it would actually even save me work in the long run. And I was able to show the company too, like, let's not wait for problems to occur, because that means more customer support, more tickets coming in the queue, more, disapproval of the technology or the application or whatever it might be. And so that saved me time, because I'd usually have to be the one they pass the tickets to and try to resolve it. So I could prove actually it would be less work for me to take that on, but technically I wasn't paid any extra to do that work. So there's still kind of an odd disadvantage at play when you are the one to volunteer, but it helps get the work done, right? And it did help me in my position anyways, both because I wanted to do it and because I knew it would help the students. And if my goal is for the students to kind of have the best learning outcomes and be able to finish the curriculum, then I was going to achieve that goal by ending up kind of retroactively redesigning the curriculum. But they would have saved a lot of time if it was actual universal design, which was ahead of time planning for that process.
So I think the ways that you all have shared that you're addressing misconceptions and you're also tackling those challenges head on, those are great ways that you're advocating for universal design and for people. What are some ways for people on the call to also advocate for universal design on university campuses? We have here today a mix of students, staff, and faculty. So what are some things that they could take away from today and set out to do on their campus?
I can chime in on this one, specifically for within the fashion space. So think fashion design, fashion merchandising, marketing, in there, anything kind of retail related, is really just kind of asking for resources that are available. So for example, I have a course on Udemy around the adaptive fashion process that, like Katherine mentioned, talks about language, talks about universal design, some of the examples that Rosemarie gave, talks about kind of that whole life cycle of how do you think universally, how do you think adaptively when you're selling products, when you're marketing products. And there are so many resources out there that I think if students are asking their instructors or asking their university leaders for access to, that once the universities kind of realize there is this need, the universities, ooh, got a little puppy friend here next to me, can then provide their students access to that are usually pretty cheap, or if not free, that can just be shared out with the larger audience. Because usually if one student is asking for it, there's probably a good handful of other students that also want the same thing or would benefit from the same thing.
So much of my journey has been because of exposure. So I wasn't very familiar with the deaf community until I was a note taker for that community. So what I've been doing at my job is actually bringing in guest lecturers, because again, I'm not the person with a disability. So bringing someone who can talk about their experiences has been helpful for us. And I love things like hackathons. So giving design challenge about how to improve the world, like making something fun and interactive, and seeing that the effort is not as difficult as they assume. Because again, these are things that are in law right now, and it's easier and cheaper to have these wonderful things that will affect everyone in the long term. So we can have it more integrated and be that voice in the room to speak up, because there's so many projects that I'm probably just passing by on my teams, and then I'm like, have you guys thought about this? So I'm actually happy that I met Dr. Rosemarie here, because we work on congresses. I tell my team about people with wheelchairs who roll into our Congress spaces. As I talk about the height of people, like what's the average height? Are they walking for a very long time? I live in New York, so yes, I walk everywhere, but there are people who are probably driving at their daily life, and they come to this Congress and it's like very, very long. Like, so are they tired when they get to our booth? So just little considerations like that about people who can share their experiences will be helpful.
I think, like, to tag team on that, I think that that's so important, is again to have those voices out there and sharing, but also to bring them all into the design process. So when you're sitting down, like you said, like the hackathon type idea, I've done that with organizations and with government bodies that I've sat down with. We talk about things, we come to understand, technically what each thing is. We talked about different marginalized groups, and we bring people in from those groups, and then we all sit there and we design together. And we come up with ideas, and it's so interesting to watch how people, start to really think outside of just themselves, because we're all, we know we're not the center of the universe, right? If somebody asks us, but our biological primitive brain does not know that. So when we learn to overcome that and to come out of that and to really share with one another, that makes such a difference. And I think another thing that people can do is to speak up and ask for accommodations, or to ask to discuss it, to ask to discuss universal design. So if you're discussing how a project's going to be handled in the classroom, if you're discussing how the layout of something is going to be, bring it up. Just say, hey, can we just real quick just talk about accessibility or talk about universal design and how this is going to happen? And just have that discussion, because a lot of times, I think Laura's the one that said it earlier, people just forget. Like they're just designing, and then they're just like, oh right, yeah, this, because it's not them, so they don't think about it. So just taking that time and speaking up is huge, and then bringing in advocates, abso-freaking-lutely.
As I look at the physical accessibility, not many of the people know what it's like to be in a wheelchair, but what if we had a few students that did some role playing to be in wheelchairs and experience what it would be like on campus, getting in and out of doors, getting into the accessible restroom, and also letting students know who should they contact. Is there a central office of disability that should take these comments? If there is an electric door that isn't working, or there is no electric on a door that should have a door that opens automatically, and just noticing some sidewalks that need to be repaired, that there's giant chunks missing in them, or a path of travel that suddenly ends in a pile of dirt and there's no more sidewalk, or curb cuts that are missing, connecting paths of travel. going into a restroom and looking at that accessible stall. Is the toilet indeed working in there? How long has it been disabled? Are the sinks and the automatic water and soap dispensers? Is the mirror at the right height? Are the paper towels at the right height? So that people start being more aware, even though they're not in a wheelchair, but could they imagine what it would be like trying to open a door, trying to use the restroom, trying to get into a building, trying to go over a curb cut that doesn't exist, getting into their car? Are there enough spaces for people to park that have the need for accessible parking, and realizing there's just not enough of them and they're not close enough to the buildings? So looking at all those aspects and knowing who should they contact as a central processing to get the work done and to put money behind the projects.
And I'll chime in there as well, Rosemarie, is just also having a conversation about that, of saying you're walking down the street with your friend. If, let's say, we're pretending to be students, you're walking through your university campus and you notice that this building doesn't have an accessible entrance. Like, mentioning that to the person you're walking with, even if you aren't necessarily taking steps to like rectify that, you're educating someone who probably also didn't think about the entrance to that building either. And now maybe next time they go into a different building, that other person might think a little bit, and, oh, right, where does someone with a wheelchair or other disability, how do they get into the building? Or any of the other examples that you mentioned.
So just for the sake of time, I did want to open it up to any questions that the audience might have, whether it's specific to one of our panelists or just a general question that we didn't get to cover today. There was a couple more things that we wanted to cover, but the conversation has just been so good, so we could spend a lot more time doing this, of course. But feel free to either unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. We would love to take any questions.
While we're waiting for that, Rosemarie, I've got to ask you, because one of my pet peeves is how you will have the handicap parking here, the ramp way over here, and then the door back over here. Like, do you see that a lot? Does that bother you too? It's like I perpetually notice this. I go to so many places, even here in Florida, where the handicap parking is right in front of the door, but the ramp is way down on the other side, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
That does happen a lot of times in the strip center parking areas,
Mhm.
especially. I want to go to let's say a caterer who's somewhere on the strip center. The accessible parking is on the opposite side of the strip center, and that's where I'm parking. And then I've got a long road ahead of me to get to the shop that I need to. And that's just the way it is on a lot of the shopping centers. It's also that way in apartments. I rented an apartment that supposedly was going to accommodate me for a while. And the accessible parking was so far away from the apartment. It's like, no, you got to put the accessible parking and a way for me to get from my van into the apartment in front of the apartment. And I argued and argued, and I never got them to make the change. So on grocery shopping days, I had to figure out how to park near the apartment and have somebody help me get the groceries out of my van and put them on the grass, then go park the van in the accessible spot, wheel myself back to the grass to put the groceries back into the apartment. It was ludicrous.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
I have a question now for the panel, I guess, for everyone. I've noticed that when we get working groups together, a lot of times we don't have people that are stakeholders, or, you know, the person that you're trying to actually help and accommodate in the room, right? We end up having all these people that are directors, so and so, and blah, blah, blah. have, I mean, what's the process of getting people to engage on this, without it coming across as like, oh, I'm just trying to do something nice to make myself look good? How do we get those people involved to actually hear their concerns rather than trying to fix a problem from the top down?
I mean, if you want to get people in the room, there's two things that are paramount. Number one, you have to sell it to them in a way that's going to make sense to them, that it's going to benefit them. So like if you're talking to an executive, tie it into productivity and money. If you're talking to individuals, we want to make your job easier. If, whatever the thing is, make it about how it's going to relate to them. Also, psychological safety. If you want people to open up and talk to you, they need to know that it's safe. And it's not enough to just go, it's a safe environment. Yeah, okay. Guess how many of us here that have disabilities have been told that and then it backfired, right? So it's not enough. So taking action. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get something small, like maybe have an anonymous feedback system, and then take action on what you get. And when they see that action, they'll believe you, and then they'll come actually talk to you. Action is what matters. I learned that so hardcore working in not only HR, but a lot of doing a lot of work in the DE&I space. Action matters in psychological safety. So that's my tip. I hope it helps.
Yeah, and for me, since I work in the digital space, I have checklists that I distribute to the teams to make sure that we are doing things that's proper for WCAG, so the Web Contents of Accessibility Guidelines, so that they can follow it. And it's pretty comprehensive, but the checklist that I provide is easy enough so that when it comes to my desk, I'm not cross-checking things individually. So it's a process that's including everyone as a part of our best practices.
Chris, I will also add in there, when I was doing research around adaptive fashion and what challenges and solutions people have within fashion, my biggest kind of strategy for getting people to talk to me was really meeting people where they were at, and trying to have some type of personal connection. So one way of like just kind of a general broad meeting people where they're at online is just easier than in person. It's easier to have a discussion online than it is to have it in person, even if there's free pizza in person. But then the other way too was, it's like Sydney mentioned in my intro, my dad had multiple sclerosis. So I started by reaching out to MS groups. And I said, hi, I'm the child of someone who had MS. I would love to talk to you guys. If you have a few minutes, I'm happy to come to wherever you are. I'm happy to come at whatever time is most convenient for you. So in that situation, it was going to one of their monthly meetings. And I took 5 minutes in the beginning. I distributed surveys like physical, and they also had a QR code if they wanted to take it online, and then also provided my contact information. So like multiple ways for people to interact with me in hopefully the way that felt easiest for them. Because I think there is that barrier to get over of like, this seems difficult. Why would I spend my time doing that? When of course it would ideally benefit everyone, but it still takes some individual time.
Thanks. It's not a question, but I have one thing is with adaptive fashion and things like that. My sister-in-law has cerebral palsy, and so Nike makes this adaptive shoe that you can break in half and then you don't have to tie it. And I saw that and I was like, these are sick. I'm going to get them for her. And then I couldn't get them anywhere, right? Because the fashion side of it had picked it up and people were buying it and reselling it. And so I had to like build myself a web bot to see when it came in stock to try to get them in her size. And then I bought 8 because she's a tough on shoes, and I was like, I'll just give her a pair every 2 years. I'll hold on to these. But, that's one of those things too, where I think the commercialization, and I could take the next 5 hours and talk about money and how that plays into all of this. Because, the cost of adaptive things, and that's just a whole nother thing. So I know Sydney would probably be like, wrap it up. We don't have time for that. But thank you for the feedback. And I learned a lot today. Appreciate everybody.
Nike did get a bunch of pushback for that. So they have done a little bit better. The other brand you should check out is called Kizix. I can drop a link.
I have 2 pairs.
Oh, you have Kizix? Yeah.
I do. Yes.
They're like the original hands-free shoe. And then they partnered with Nike to make the Nike version too.
And I bought them when I was pregnant. So that's one of the reasons. So again, accessibility can affect being disabled can be any point of your life, and that was a barrier when I was pregnant to tie my shoes. So that was perfect pair of shoes to get. Awesome.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for being here today. I do want to toss it back over to Caroline because she was the person who put this whole thing together, got these amazing panelists here. So Caroline, if you want to close us out, I'll give it back to you.
I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who joined, and it was so inspiring to hear you all talk about universal design. I learned a lot, and I thought I already knew a lot. So, thank you so much for your insights, and we are so lucky to have gotten to hear you guys speak. And thank you everyone who joined. I hope you had fun and learned a lot.
Thank you.